Good evening and welcome back. Tonight, we begin a long, slow drift across the immense ocean of human thought and the story of the entire history of philosophy. Calming Bedtime Story. We will trace the quiet paths of reason, the gentle questions of existence, and the deep, enduring search for wisdom that has spanned millennia. I invite you to share where you're listening from. Let the atmosphere of your own quiet room tone settle softly around us. Settle in now. Find warmth and soften your breath. Allow the weight of the day's thinking to lift from your mind. Remember, there is nothing to solve, nothing to resist. All the plans and tasks can wait until the morning light. Let my voice be your soft anchor tonight, guiding you into a deep, restful calm. We are drifting back through time, towards the ancient shores of the Aegean and the meditative halls of the East, under the deep expanse of the quiet night. Nothing in tonight's story will disturb your peace. Let the gentle greeting settle over you. Now allow yourself a long, slow breath in and out, releasing any lingering tightness. Imagine the air around you is turning soft like mist. 'Twas moonlight, settling over the silent ruins of an ancient temple. We are entering an ancient myth-like cadence, where the drama of history has been filtered and softened into serene visuals. Time moves slowly here, measured only by the steady, slow tides of contemplative thought. Our journey will follow the faint, winding trails of reason, ensuring no tension interrupts your drift. If these gentle journeys help you rest, you may leave a soft like or subscribe, only if it feels comforting and natural for your night. Chapter 1. Origins. The quiet wonder of the Ionian shores. We begin our long narrative at the ultimate origin, the time when the first thinkers gently turned away from myth and toward reason. This is the ancient background tracing the ancient roots of philosophy along the eastern shores of the Aegean Sea, in the Greek city-states of Ionia around the 6th century BCE. The world at this time was explained by mythology stories of gods, spirits, and divine actions that shaped human fate and the natural world. But along the vibrant cosmopolitan shores of Ionia, a new, quieter curiosity began to stir. The first thinkers asked a simple yet profound question. What is the fundamental substance of the cosmos? They sought a single natural principle, a physis that lay beneath the chaotic appearance of the world. This question was not motivated by fear or divine command, but by quiet wonder and the gentle persistence of observation. The first of these thinkers was Thales of Miletus. Imagine him by the sea, observing the constant rhythmic movement of the distant waves. Thales concluded with tranquil simplicity that the fundamental substance, the origin of all things, must be water. Water is ubiquitous, capable of existing in liquid, solid, and gaseous states. It is essential for life and perpetually in motion. This was a soft, distant beginning, the very first attempt to explain the universe using a single, observable natural element rather than a divine whim. Thales' student Anaximander offered a gentle metaphor that expanded on this idea. He suggested that the first principle could not be a specific element like water or air, because all known elements oppose and destroy one another. Instead, the ultimate origin must be something infinite, boundless, and undefined, the apeiron. The apeiron was the primordial, limitless substrate from which all things emerged, and to which they returned, ensuring a perpetual, gentle balance in the cosmos. Another contemporary, Anaximenes, then proposed air. Air, or pneuma, was seen as the vital, invisible force, the very warm breath of life that pervades and shapes the universe through processes of condensation and rarefaction. These Ionian thinkers were known as the Pre-Socratics. Their core activity was not arguing, but quietly speculating on the nature of reality, looking for rational, systematic explanations for the cosmos. They set the tone for all philosophy that followed a continuous, gentle search for unity beneath diversity. Their geographical setting, the Ionian cities, was crucial. Situated at the crossroads of trade between Greece, Egypt, and Mesopotamia, these cities were exposed to diverse knowledge and perspectives. This environment fostered the intellectual freedom necessary to question traditional beliefs without the stress of rigid political or religious dogma. The ancient roots of philosophy lie here in the quiet contemplation of nature, in the search for a unifying principle, and in the gentle footsteps of thinkers who simply chose to observe the world and ask why. Chapter 2: Origins. The shift from nature to number. The quiet search for the single primordial substance, physis, continued its soft journey, gradually moving philosophy from the observable world of nature toward the abstract realms of mathematics and eternal change. This continuation of the origins expanded the scope of rational inquiry. One powerful current in this early flow was led by Heraclitus of Ephesus. Imagine him observing the continuous, rhythmic flow of a slow river. Heraclitus concluded that the fundamental principle was not a substance at all, but change itself, or becoming. He famously stated, using a gentle metaphor, that one cannot step into the same river twice, for both the river and the person have changed. For Heraclitus, the cosmos was defined by perpetual flux and tension, a harmonious struggle like the tuning of a lyre or the balance of a bow. This constant controlled change was governed by an unseen organizing principle he called the logos reason, or law. Contrasting this gentle current of change was Parmenides of Elea. His contribution was a profound softening filter on reality. Parmenides concluded through pure quiet logic that change is fundamentally impossible. True reality, he argued, must be eternal, indivisible, unchanging, and perfectly uniform. Motion and difference as we perceive them are merely illusions perceived by the senses. This radical idea asserted that being is the only reality, and that thought and being are one and the same. This was a challenging yet serene notion, prioritizing the unchanging truth, accessible only through reason, over the chaotic appearance of the sensory world. The tension between Heraclitus's becoming and Parmenides's being became the bedrock for much of Western philosophy that followed. Another crucial development in this continuing origin was the Pythagorean school founded by Pythagoras of Samos. Their focus was not on elements, but on number. Pythagoras and his followers believed that the ultimate nature of reality was mathematical. They found that the harmony of musical notes could be explained through simple numerical ratios, suggesting that the entire cosmos, from the movement of the planets to the structure of society, was governed by underlying numerical patterns. This was a major softened historical shift, taking philosophy away from physical elements, water, air, and directing it towards abstract eternal concepts, numbers, forms. The Pythagoreans lived by strict, gentle rules of communal living and purification, viewing philosophy and mathematics as spiritual pathways to understand the harmony of the spheres, the quiet, musical perfection of the cosmos. These thinkers collectively completed the initial phase of origins. They established the core questions that would drive the next era. Is reality one or many? Is it static or changing? Is it material or abstract? Their diverse speculations were the warm breath that laid the intellectual foundation for the classical age. Chapter 3: Formation. The Athenian shift and the Sophists. The quiet cosmic speculations of the Pre-Socratics, focused on the substance of the world, gradually moved into a new phase of formation, a definitive shift in focus from the cosmos to mankind. This intellectual evolution took place primarily in the vibrant democratic polis of Athens during the 5th century BCE. This Athenian shift was driven by practical political necessity. As democracy flourished, the ability to persuade, argue, and articulate policy became the most valuable political skill. The focus of inquiry moved from the unchanging nature of being to the fluid human nature of justice, law, and virtue arete. The primary figures in this formation were the Sophists. Imagine them as traveling teachers moving with gentle footsteps from city to city, offering instruction in rhetoric and the art of successful argument. They were the first to charge fees for their philosophical knowledge, reflecting the high value placed on persuasion in the newly formed democratic society. The Sophists introduced a profound softening filter into ethical thought relativism. The most famous sophist, Protagoras, famously whispered the quiet idea that man is the measure of all things, meaning that truth, morality, and justice are not absolute or eternal, but are relative to the individual human perception or the social convention of the moment. This gentle metaphor challenged the Pre-Socratic search for a singular objective cosmic truth. If one person's opinion is as true as another's, then the goal of discussion is not discovery, but persuasion. The Sophists taught students how to argue both sides of any case, emphasizing skill in rhetoric over adherence to a fixed moral truth. Another key sophist, Gorgias, took this relativism to a philosophical extreme. Articulating a systematic skepticism, nothing truly exists, and even if it did exist, we could not know it. And even if we could know it, we could not communicate it to others. This gentle, sweeping doubt was a distant echo of philosophical retreat, highlighting the limits of human knowledge and certainty. The formation period saw philosophy move into the marketplace, and the assembly becoming a practical tool for political and social success. The Sophists did not seek eternal answers. They sought functional wisdom for the immediate human experience. Their work forced an intense fundamental examination of human nature law and the structure of society. This intense focus on the human realm was the essential prerequisite for the next great philosopher, Socrates, who would quietly challenge the Sophists' focus on mere persuasion, turning the ethical inquiry even deeper inward. The warm breath of debate and intellectual freedom in Athens had created the ideal environment for philosophy to truly define itself. Chapter 4. Early Journeys. Socrates and the Journey Inward. The philosophical landscape, softened by the Sophists' focus on rhetoric and relativism, was about to undergo its most significant early journey. The definitive turn toward ethics and self-knowledge, guided by Socrates, B.C. 469-399 BCE. This shift moved the central concern of philosophy from political persuasion to the quiet internal examination of the soul. Socrates was an unusual figure in Athens. He charged no fee and wrote nothing down, believing that true wisdom resided in dialogue. Imagine him moving with gentle footsteps through the Athenian marketplace, engaging citizens in soft, patient conversation. His method, the Socratic method, was not about teaching fixed answers, but about gently exposing contradictions in the beliefs of his interlocutors, leading them towards self-discovery. Socrates articulated a profound, yet simple, gentle metaphor. The unexamined life is not worth living. His entire philosophical project was a relentless, quiet quest for virtue arete. He believed that virtue was fundamentally knowledge, and that vice stemmed from ignorance. If a person truly knows what is good, they will naturally do what is good. The key to a good life, therefore, was not external wealth or political power, but rigorous internal self-examination. This was a major early journey because it inverted the philosophical project. The Pre-Socratics asked, "What is the cosmos made of?" The Sophists asked, "How do we succeed in the city?" Socrates asked, "How should I live my life?" He redefined philosophy as a moral pursuit, turning the light of reason inward onto the human condition. His method, the constant questioning of assumptions and definitions, created tension not through political conflict, but through intellectual challenge. By exposing the shallowness of many powerful Athenians' claims to wisdom, he accumulated powerful silent opposition. The eventual death of Socrates, which we view as a softening filter, a symbolic change in the dialogue between the individual and the state, was the culmination of this intellectual friction. He was accused of impiety and corrupting the youth. His acceptance of the legal decision, despite the opportunity to escape, was a final serene act of philosophical integrity, prioritizing obedience to the laws of the polis over his own survival. Socrates' quiet sacrifice was not an ending, but a profound legacy. It solidified the image of the philosopher as a principled individual, willing to confront societal assumptions in the search for truth. His life and death became the ultimate foundation for ethical inquiry. His ideas were carried forward and formalized by his most famous student Plato, ensuring that the warm breath of Socratic questioning would shape every philosophical tradition that followed. The gentle footsteps of Socrates in the Athenian marketplace marked the single most important origin in the history of Western moral thought. Chapter 5. Formation. Plato, the Forms and the Cave. The profound legacy of Socrates of the insistence on ethical examination was carried and meticulously formalized by his most famous student, Plato, 428–347 BCE. Plato's work was the next colossal formation in the history of philosophy, shifting the focus from the human condition to the nature of ultimate, unchanging reality. Plato founded the Academy in Athens, often cited as the first true institution of higher learning in the Western world. Imagine this place as a quiet stone sanctuary devoted to continuous disciplined intellectual inquiry, where the warm breath of debate and mathematical reasoning was sustained. Plato's central contribution was his theory of forms. This concept was a majestic softening filter for the tension between Parmenides' eternal being and Heraclitus' perpetual becoming. Plato concluded that the objects we perceive with our senses, a chair, a tree, a beautiful act, are imperfect changing copies of an eternal, non-material blueprint. These blueprints, the forms, reside in a perfect, unchanging, non-physical realm. The forms are the true origin of reality. Concepts like justice, beauty, and goodness exist absolutely and eternally in this realm of forms. The goal of the philosopher, therefore, is not to study the shifting illusions of the material world, but to use reason and contemplation to access these perfect, eternal truths. Plato articulated this idea through his famous gentle metaphor, the allegory of the cave. Imagine prisoners chained in an underground cave since birth, able only to look at the wall in front of them. Behind them, a fire burns, and people walk casting shadows on the wall. The prisoners, knowing nothing else, believe the shadows are the only reality. The philosopher is the prisoner who is freed, forced to turn away from the shadow's sensory experience and ascend into the sunlight in the realm of the forms illuminated by the form of the good. This journey is painful and disorienting, but it is the only path to true knowledge. This formation led to Plato's vision of the ideal society outlined in his work, The Republic. He envisioned a meticulously structured society governed not by popular will or wealth, but by philosopher-kings, individuals whose minds had successfully ascended from the cave and were capable of perceiving the eternal form of justice. This was a calm reinterpretation of political rule, prioritizing wisdom over power. Plato's immense legacy was the institutionalization of systematic philosophy. He cemented the idea that reality is dual, divided between the material and the ideal, and ensured that the Socratic ethical quest became a formalized metaphysical exploration. The gentle footsteps of his students leaving the academy carried the profound question of the forms into every corner of the ancient world. Chapter 6. Formation. Aristotle and the Earthly Realm. The profound idealistic formation of Plato, centered on the transcendent forms, was soon met by a systematic, measured counterpoint from his most brilliant student, Aristotle, c. 384–322 BCE. Aristotle's work was the next colossal act of intellectual formation, gently bringing philosophy back down from the heavens to the earthly realm of observation and classification. Aristotle spent nearly 20 years studying at Plato's academy, absorbing the Socratic legacy. But he eventually separated, forming his own school, the Lyceum. Imagine the gentle footsteps of his students walking the paths peripatoi of the Lyceum grounds, while discussing philosophy, giving his school the name peripatetic, meaning walking about. Aristotle's primary philosophical evolution was a rejection of the separate dualistic nature of the forms. He concluded that the forms were not transcendent blueprints existing in a separate realm, but were immanent, existing within the objects themselves. The form of the chair is simply the essence or structure that makes the chair what it is, and this essence cannot exist independently of a physical chair. This quiet yet profound shift brought philosophy to focus intensely on the world of sensory experience. Aristotle dedicated his life to meticulous observation and classification. He created a monumental system of knowledge studying everything from logic and ethics to physics, poetry, and biology. His legacy lies in his systematic approach. He introduced the concepts of formal logic, developing the syllogism, a methodical, tranquil way to derive a conclusion from two premises which provided the fundamental toolkit for reasoning for the next 2 millennia. In ethics, Aristotle articulated the gentle metaphor of the golden mean. He argued that virtue is achieved by finding the balanced mean between two extremes of behavior. For instance, courage is the mean between the deficiency of cowardice and the excess of rashness. The goal of the good life, eudaimonia, often translated as flourishing or living well, is achieved through habit and rational practice, not merely abstract knowledge. In metaphysics, Aristotle developed the framework of the four causes, a systematic, unhurried way to explain why anything exists. Material cause. What is it made of, e.g. bronze? Formal cause. What is its shape or essence, e.g. a statue's design? Efficient cause. What brought it into being, the sculptor's action. Final cause. What is its purpose or goal, e.g. to honor a god? Aristotle's philosophy was a majestic act of comprehensive formation. He domesticated the abstract idealism of Plato, creating a philosophical system rooted in practical observation and rigorous structure. The warm breath of his influence spread throughout the Mediterranean, providing the organizational spine for philosophy across the Hellenistic world and beyond. Chapter 7. Early Journeys. Hellenistic Philosophy and the Quest for Peace. The immense systems created by Plato and Aristotle provided the foundation, but the subsequent early journeys of philosophy focused on a more immediate practical concern: how to live peacefully in a world of political uncertainty. This philosophical phase, known as the Hellenistic period, 323-31 BCE, shifted the focus from the grand structure of the polis to the quiet internal fortitude of the individual. The vast Hellenistic successor kingdoms created by Alexander the Great's conquest dissolved the intimate political structure of the Greek city-state. Citizens found themselves subjects of massive distant monarchies, leading to a loss of political agency. This softening filter of political disengagement created a new philosophical imperative: the search for inner tranquility, ataraxia. 3 major schools emerged, each offering a different path for the gentle footsteps toward inner peace. Stoicism, founded by Zeno of Citium. The Stoics taught that the universe is governed by the logos, universal reason, or divine law. True freedom is found in accepting what one cannot change and living in accordance with nature. Imagine a Stoic student moving with quiet acceptance through the world, recognizing that external events, wealth, suffering, fame, are indifferent, and that virtue is the only true good. Their primary ethical tool was the warm breath of rational control over one's own judgments and desires. Epicureanism, founded by Epicurus, this school defined the ultimate goal of life as pleasure, but quickly clarified this pleasure as the tranquil absence of disturbance, ataraxia, and the absence of physical pain. Aponia. Epicurus taught that the greatest joys are found in simple pleasures, the company of friends, and intellectual contemplation, far removed from the stress of political life. They practiced a gentle, methodical materialism, believing the soul was made of atoms that dissolved upon death, thus eliminating the fear of the afterlife. Skepticism. This school, formalized by thinkers like Pyrrho, suggested that since absolute certainty about the nature of reality is impossible, the only rational response is to suspend judgment epoche on all matters. By ceasing the endless, anxious search for ultimate truth, one achieves tranquility. This was a philosophical path toward peace, born from the simple realization that constant inquiry creates perpetual tension. These early journeys were deeply personal and therapeutic. Philosophy was no longer merely an intellectual pursuit. It was a guide for living, offering solace in a vast, changing world. The distant night of political uncertainty was met with the lantern glow of individual philosophical choice. The legacy of this Hellenistic period was the shift of philosophy's primary purpose from metaphysics, Plato, Aristotle, to ethics and self-mastery. These schools ensured that the core Socratic question, "How should I live?" remained the central guiding inquiry, even as the political landscape dissolved around them. Chapter 8. Early Journeys. The Roman Adaptation and the Law. The Hellenistic search for individual tranquility. The gentle footsteps of the Stoics and Epicureans soon traveled westward, encountering the pragmatic, organized world of the expanding Roman Republic. This phase of early journeys was defined by the subtle, profound adaptation of Greek philosophical ideas to serve the practical needs of Roman statecraft and law. The Romans did not embrace Greek philosophy with the same abstract metaphysical passion as Plato or Aristotle. They treated it as a softening filter for their existing legal and ethical structures. The core Roman virtues, duty, pietas, steadfastness, constantia, and gravitas, seriousness, found a natural kinship with Stoicism. Imagine Roman senators and jurists adopting Stoic principles. They were not seeking escape from the world, but seeking inner fortitude to navigate the stress and tension of public life. The Stoic emphasis on reason logos governing the universe became the perfect philosophical justification for the Roman commitment to universal law. The concept that all men, regardless of status, shared a common rationality provided the ethical basis for the development of ius gentium, law of nations, and later natural law. Cicero 106-43. BCE. The great orator and statesman was a primary conduit for this philosophical transfer. He wrote extensively in Latin, translating and synthesizing Greek philosophical concepts for a Roman audience. His works preserved Greek thought, giving it a Roman voice focused on political philosophy, rhetoric, and the duties of a citizen. Cicero's exploration of the ideal republic was a profound legacy, ensuring that the philosophical debates of Athens continued to flow into the Roman world, carried on the warm breath of Latin prose. Epicureanism also found a quiet home in Rome, though often misunderstood. While many Romans embraced its advocacy for simple pleasure and withdrawal from political life, the poet Lucretius gave it its most important philosophical voice in his serene meditative poem, De Rerum Natura, on the nature of things. This work, an elegant defense of Epicurean materialism and atomism, was a calm reinterpretation of physics, seeking to free the mind from the fear of the gods and the afterlife. This Roman early journey integrated philosophy not into schools like the academy, but directly into law, rhetoric, and governance. Philosophy became the silent, pervasive guide for the educated Roman elite. It provided the intellectual legacy that ensured the vast Roman Empire was governed not just by military might, but by a consistent philosophical commitment to order and duty. The distant night of political conflict that defined the late Republic and early Empire was met by the individual's recourse to Stoicism, a philosophical sanctuary, providing inner tranquility regardless of the chaos of the external world. Chapter 9. Early Journeys. The patristic synthesis and the new Plato. The philosophical energy that flowed through the Roman Empire entered a major new phase of early journeys with the quiet, pervasive rise of Christianity. This era, known as the patristic period c. 100–450 CE, saw philosophy undergo a profound softening filter as it engaged with and was ultimately transformed by spiritual and theological concerns. The early Christian thinkers, the Church Fathers or Patristics, inherited the complete philosophical toolkit of the Greeks, the logic of Aristotle, the ethics of Stoicism, and the metaphysics of Plato. Their task was to use the language of Greek philosophy to articulate and defend Christian doctrines, creating a grand intellectual synthesis. The most influential philosophical current to emerge during this period was the re-emergence of Platonism, often referred to as Neoplatonism. Thinkers like Plotinus 204–270 CE articulated a systematic vision rooted in Plato's forms, but infused with a mystical framework. Plotinus envisioned reality as a gradual, gentle emanation from a single, ultimate source. The One, a concept similar to Plato's form of the good. Imagine the cosmos as a drifting light slowly moving outward from the One. The light loses its intensity the further it travels, creating the intellect, nous the soul, and finally, the material world matter. The goal of life for Plotinus was a gentle metaphor, a spiritual ascent or return journey back to mystical union with the One achieved through rigorous contemplation and purification of the soul. This concept provided a sophisticated philosophical structure for spirituality that resonated deeply with the early Christian understanding of God and the soul's journey. The most monumental figure of the patristic synthesis was St. Augustine of Hippo 354–430 CE. Augustine steeped in both the Roman legal tradition and Neoplatonism, before his conversion used the philosophical structures of Plato to build the foundational theology of the Western Church. Augustine adopted Plato's vision of the two realms, the temporal changing material world, and the eternal perfect realm of the forms, and calmly reinterpreted them as the earthly city, the world of humans and sin, and the city of God, the eternal spiritual realm of truth and grace. His work, The City of God, became a profound legacy, defining the relationship between the spiritual and the secular. For the next 1,000 years, Augustine also integrated the Socratic journey inward, arguing that truth is not found externally, but through inner reflection, where the eternal truths, the forms, are revealed directly by God within the soul. This blend of Greek metaphysics and Christian doctrine was a massive softening filter, directing philosophical inquiry toward the divine and the internal ethical life, away from the dry scientific inquiry of the early Greeks. The warm breath of Greek reason had successfully shaped the spiritual architecture of the emerging medieval world, ensuring that the legacy of Athens would endure long after the political dissolution of the Western Roman Empire. Chapter 10. Early Journeys. The Medieval Quiet and Scholasticism. The dissolution of the Western Roman Empire and the subsequent rise of decentralized kingdoms ushered philosophy into a long phase of early journeys defined by its intimate relationship with theology. This was the medieval quiet, a period when philosophical inquiry became the handmaiden of faith, primarily preserved within monasteries and cathedral schools. The political fragmentation of the West meant that the widespread public philosophical discourse of the Athenian formation was replaced by a more internal, structured inquiry. The core philosophical task was to reconcile the newly solidified doctrines of Christianity with the rational legacy of the Greeks, particularly Aristotle and Plato. In the early Middle Ages, the primary philosophical access was through Plato via Augustine and Neoplatonism, as much of Aristotle's scientific and logical work was lost to the Latin West. Thinkers like Boethius c. 480–524 CE played a vital role quietly translating and preserving key logical texts, ensuring that the gentle footsteps of Greek reason were not completely forgotten. His serene work, The Consolation of Philosophy, written while facing death, became a profound legacy for the entire period, blending Stoic acceptance with Christian faith. The turning point within this quiet phase came in the 12th and 13th centuries, with the massive reintroduction of the complete works of Aristotle into the Latin West. This knowledge flowed primarily through two routes: the established intellectual centers of the Byzantine Empire, Constantinople, and the vibrant multilingual centers of the Islamic and Jewish worlds in Spain, Al-Andalus, and Sicily. The Islamic philosophical tradition had carefully preserved and expanded upon Aristotle's logic, metaphysics, and science. Great thinkers like Avicenna ibn Sina and Averroes ibn Rushd in the East and West utilized Aristotle's framework to develop profound philosophical systems. Their warm breath of inquiry and commentary flowed into the Christian West, presenting a comprehensive, systematic, and often challenging rational view of the universe. This influx of Aristotelian thought led to the massive intellectual formation known as scholasticism. Imagine this as a systematic, unhurried process of building a logical architecture. Scholasticism was an intellectual method used in the emerging European universities, such as Paris and Oxford, aimed at using Aristotle's rigorous logic to systematically organize and understand Christian theological truth. The central figure in this synthesis was St. Thomas Aquinas, ERC, 1205-1274. Aquinas, in his immense work Summa Theologiae, argued that reason Aristotle and faith Christianity were not opposed, but were two complementary pathways to discover divine truth. He created a monumental softening filter integrating the natural world, as described by Aristotle's observation, into the divine order, ensuring the legacy of Greek reason was secured within the structure of Western thought. The medieval quiet was therefore an immense period of intellectual digestion and careful preservation, ensuring that the philosophical ancient roots survived the political turmoil, ready for the next great turning point. Chapter 11. Turning Points. The Renaissance of Humanism. The structural theological formation of scholasticism, built upon the rediscovery of Aristotle, provided immense intellectual stability throughout the medieval quiet. However, by the 14th and 15th centuries, this system began to approach its most significant turning point, the Renaissance of Humanism. This shift was a profound, quiet evolution that moved the focus of inquiry from the divine and the universal back to the human and the individual. This transformation was not a sudden, sharp rejection of faith, but a change in emphasis, a softening filter applied to the scholastic curriculum. Instead of focusing solely on logic and metaphysics as tools to understand theology, thinkers and scholars turned their attention to the classical humanities, literature, poetry, history, and rhetoric, which they believed better illuminated the human experience and the virtuous life. Imagine the atmosphere in the emerging intellectual centers of Italy, Florence, Rome, Venice, where the gentle footsteps of scholars moved through ancient ruins, rediscovering and meticulously translating classical texts by Plato, Cicero, and Greek historians. This rediscovery was the warm breath that inspired the humanists. They sought to revive the literary and moral wisdom of antiquity, believing that the purpose of education was not preparation for the afterlife, but the cultivation of human excellence, virtù. The most powerful legacy of this movement was the focus on free will and human dignity. Thinkers like Pico della Mirandola, in his oration on the dignity of man, articulated a profound, gentle metaphor. God gave humanity the unique ability to choose its own nature, to ascend to the divine or descend to the animalistic. This assertion of individual potential and freedom of choice was a deliberate contrast to the medieval emphasis on humanity's fallen nature. The humanists championed rhetoric, the art of persuasion over the rigid technical logic of the scholastics, viewing it as the essential tool for active civic life, echoing the original formation period of the Sophists and Cicero. They aimed to create the eloquent, morally responsible citizen capable of shaping his community rather than the detached, abstract philosopher. This intellectual turning point redefined the relationship between the secular and the sacred. while deeply religious humanism shifted intellectual energy toward the practical, ethical questions of living in this world, rather than exclusively preparing for the next. This was a calm reinterpretation of the purpose of philosophy, refocusing it on practical morality and civic engagement. The distant echoes of this shift would eventually contribute to the political and religious transformations of the subsequent centuries. The revival of classical learning provided the intellectual toolkit for later challenges to established authority, ensuring that the low embers of philosophical independence were fanned back into a full glow. Chapter 12. Turning Points. The Scientific Revolution and Empiricism. The humanist focus on human potential and the dignity of the individual eventually prepared the ground for the most dramatic and far-reaching turning point in the history of thought, the scientific revolution, 16th and 17th centuries. This was a profound, quiet evolution that fundamentally challenged the philosophical and scientific framework inherited from Aristotle and the scholastics. The primary shift was methodological, a movement away from relying solely on ancient authority and deductive logic towards observation, experimentation, and mathematics. We view this not as a conflict with philosophy, but as a methodological softening filter applied to epistemology, the study of knowledge transforming how humanity sought answers about the physical world. The core of this philosophical turning point was the rise of empiricism and rationalism, two complementary approaches that would define the era. Modi 1. Empiricism, knowledge from senses. This current was championed by thinkers like Francis Bacon, 1561–1626. Bacon argued that true knowledge must be derived through careful systematic observation and experimentation of the natural world, using inductive reasoning, moving from specific observations to general principles. He saw the need to methodically clear the mind of old prejudices, which he called idols, much like the Socratic method sought to clear false beliefs. His work was a calm reinterpretation of how to approach nature, prioritizing gentle footsteps of objective inquiry over reliance on ancient texts. 2. Rationalism, knowledge from reason. This parallel current was formally established by René Descartes, 1596–1650. Descartes sought absolute certainty and believed that knowledge could be established through pure internal reason and deductive logic, much like mathematics. His famous philosophical gentle metaphor was to doubt everything that could possibly be doubted until he reached an undeniable foundational truth. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. This assertion established the thinking self as the ultimate undeniable origin of certainty. Descartes' philosophy led to the problem of mind-body dualism, the distinction between the non-physical thinking mind res cogitans and the physical extended matter res extensa. This dualism, though later challenged, was a crucial legacy that separated the spiritual and scientific domains, allowing physical science to proceed without interference from theological concerns. The fusion of Bacon's empiricism and Descartes' rationalism provided the intellectual warm breath that fueled the scientific advances of Copernicus, Galileo, and Newton. Philosophy had quietly provided the methodology that led to the triumph of the scientific method, ensuring that inquiry into the nature of reality would forever be tethered to systematic observation and logical consistency. This turning point was a definitive move towards intellectual self-reliance and the formal beginning of the modern philosophical project. Chapter 13. Early Journeys. Locke, Hume, and the British Empiricists. The methodological turning point of the scientific revolution centered on the foundational work of Descartes' rationalism and Bacon. Empiricism quickly led to a sustained phase of early journeys defined by the deep exploration of empiricism in Britain. This movement sought to understand the limits and origins of human knowledge purely through sensory experience. The key figure in establishing this philosophical tradition was John Locke, 1632–1704. Locke's great contribution was the concept of the tabula rasa, or blank slate. He argued that the mind at birth is empty, completely devoid of innate ideas, challenging Descartes' rationalism. All knowledge, therefore, is acquired through experience, either from sensation external objects or reflection internal mental operations. This quiet assertion that all knowledge is slowly, patiently formed by the external world writing upon the mind was a powerful softening filter for the problem of innate knowledge. It meant that certainty was found not through deep, mystical introspection, but through the careful, gentle footsteps of observation. Locke's work extended into political philosophy, where he articulated a profound legacy for modern liberal thought. He argued for the concept of natural rights, life, liberty, and property derived from natural law, and asserted that governments derive their just authority from the consent of the governed. This was a calm reinterpretation of political rule, grounding legitimacy in the rights of the individual rather than divine authority. The journey of empiricism continued with George Berkeley, 1685-1753, who took Locke's reliance on sensory experience to a radical yet serene conclusion. Esse est percipi et to be is to be perceived. Berkeley concluded that since all knowledge consists of perceptions in the mind, the only things that exist are minds and their ideas. Material substance, independent of a perceiving mind, is merely an illusion. This was a challenging but soft, distant philosophical idealism sustained by the constant necessary perception of God, who ensures that the world continues to exist even when human eyes are closed. The culmination of the empiricist journey was David Hume, 1711-1776. Hume applied the rigorous lens of empirical observation to the very processes of human thought, leading to profound skepticism. He gently yet devastatingly challenged the philosophical certainty of causality. We do not perceive cause and effect, Hume argued. We only observe a constant conjunction of two events, A followed by B. The belief that A causes B is merely a psychological habit or expectation, not a logical necessity. Hume's calm questioning of causality was a massive turning point. It fractured the philosophical certainty that had underpinned both the scientific method and traditional metaphysics. His serene skepticism left philosophy in a state of productive tension, awaiting a figure capable of integrating the certainty of reason with the uncertainty of experience. The warm breath of inquiry had successfully revealed the limits of human knowledge itself. Chapter 14. Turning Points. Kant and the Critical Synthesis. The profound skepticism raised by David Hume, the gentle yet devastating questioning of causality, created a crisis in philosophy, effectively fracturing the foundations of both rationalism and empiricism. This tension was met by the most significant intellectual turning point of the Enlightenment, the critical synthesis achieved by Immanuel Kant, 1724-1804. Kant famously claimed that Hume awakened him from his dogmatic slumber. Recognizing the validity of both Hume's skepticism that knowledge comes from experience and the mathematical certainty of rationalism, Kant sought to reconcile them, creating a completely new philosophical formation. Kant's central question was, how is knowledge possible? His answer was a gentle yet monumental calm reinterpretation of the mind's role. He concluded that knowledge is not merely passively received empiricism nor simply deduced rationalism. It is actively constructed by the mind. Imagine the mind as a processor with built-in universal software. Kant argued that our minds possess a priori before experience structures such as space-time and causality, which act as organizing frameworks. We do not perceive raw chaotic reality. Our minds automatically filter and structure sensory data through these built-in concepts. This concept established the difference between the phenomenal world and the world as we experience and structure it, bound by space-time and causality, and the nominal world, the world as it truly is, independent of our perception, which we can never truly know. This dualism was a softening filter for metaphysical inquiry. It confirmed that scientific knowledge is absolutely certain within the phenomenal realm, since the rules are universal and built in, but limited in its ability to reach ultimate truths like God, freedom, and immortality. Kant also revolutionized ethics, moving the inquiry away from consequences like utility and toward duty. He articulated the categorical imperative, a moral law that applies universally and unconditionally. This moral law, derived from reason, he acts as a soft wind guiding action. Always act in such a way that you could rationally will your action to become a universal law. This focused the ethical quest on rational duty and moral autonomy. The legacy of Kant's critical synthesis was the definitive turning point into modern philosophy. He demonstrated that philosophy must be self-aware, analyzing the limits and structure of human reason itself. The warm breath of his influence permeated everything that followed, setting the stage for the immense idealist movements of the 19th century and the deep questioning of the 20th. His work ensured that philosophy, having navigated the skepticism of Hume, emerged stronger and more rigorously defined.
That in Chapter 15, Formation. The German Idealists and the Absolute. The profound critical synthesis achieved by Kant, which established the mind's active role in structuring reality, provided the definitive turning point into the 19th century. This new era of formation was dominated by the German idealists who took Kant's concepts of mind and structure and propelled them toward the absolute and the historical.
Imagine this intellectual current as a slow river, flowing inevitably toward a vast, unified ocean. The idealists challenged Kant's final limitation, the unknowable noumenal world, the thing in itself. They argued that if the mind is the only source of structure and knowledge, then reality itself must ultimately be rooted in the mind. The journey began with Johann Gottlieb Fichte, 1762–1814, who asserted that the ultimate origin of all reality is the absolute unconditioned ego or self. This ego, through a continuous gentle struggle of self-assertion and limitation, the not-ego or external world, actively creates reality. This was a radical, calm reinterpretation of human freedom, placing the individual will at the core of cosmic creation. The philosophical formation reached its zenith with Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, 1770–1831. Hegel's contribution was the integration of history into the absolute. He viewed reality not as a static substance like Parmenides or a fixed structure like Kant, but as a continuous evolutionary process, the absolute spirit-geist gradually coming to full self-conscious knowledge of itself through the unfolding of human history. Hegel's key philosophical tool was the dialectic, a gentle metaphor for historical progress through intellectual tension. This involved a process where an idea, thesis, naturally generates its contradiction, antithesis, and the resulting conflict, which we view as intellectual stress, is resolved in a higher unified truth synthesis. This synthesis then becomes the new thesis, ensuring the constant, unhurried progress of the spirit towards its ultimate goal of perfect freedom and self-awareness. Hegel saw the entire history of philosophy, art, religion, and politics as this necessary dialectical journey. The legacy of his system was monumental. He provided a massive, cohesive narrative for history, assuring thinkers that everything that had happened was a necessary step in the universe's self-realization. This systematic view offered immense intellectual solace and stability. The warm breath of idealism flowed across Europe, shaping intellectual thought in profound ways. However, this focus on the absolute and the spirit would soon trigger a strong, quiet counter-reaction, led by thinkers who sought to return philosophy from the grand universal narrative back to the immediate, imperfect reality of the individual human experience. The pendulum of thought was ready for its next subtle swing. Chapter 16. Turning Points. The revolt against the absolute. The monumental system of Hegel, which placed the individual as a mere moment in the grand sweep of the absolute spirit, created a powerful turning point through a wave of passionate counter-movements. This was a revolt quiet yet firm that aimed to bring philosophy back from the abstract universal narrative to the immediate subjective reality of the individual human being. The most profound challenge came from Søren Kierkegaard, 1813-1855, the father of existentialism. Kierkegaard was a Christian thinker who viewed Hegel's systematic certainty and historical determinism as fundamentally anti-human. He asserted that the highest philosophical reality is not objective reason, but subjectivity and passionate commitment. Imagine Kierkegaard moving with gentle footsteps against the immense tide of Hegelian thought. He argued that the most crucial truths, those concerning faith, morality, and existence, cannot be captured by objective logical systems. These truths are only realized through agonizing individual choice tension and the leap of faith. This was a calm reinterpretation of human freedom, emphasizing the individual's anxiety and responsibility in a vast, uncertain universe. Kierkegaard introduced the philosophical gentle metaphor of the three stages of existence: aesthetic defined by immediate pleasure sensation and the pursuit of enjoyment; ethical defined by commitment to universal moral laws and duties; religious defined by the radical solitary and often irrational leap of faith transcending the universal ethical laws. His work was a profound legacy, shifting the central philosophical question from "what is the absolute" to "what does it mean for me to exist?" The philosophical focus was irrevocably returned to the concrete lived experience. Simultaneously, a materialist countercurrent emerged, seeking to ground reality in the observable social world. Karl Marx, 1818-1883, took Hegel's concept of the dialectic and performed a powerful softening filter, removing the spirit and replacing it with material conditions and economic production. Marx argued that history is driven not by the conflict of ideas, but by the quiet, pervasive conflict, which we view as systemic stress between economic classes. His philosophical goal was not merely to interpret the world, but to change it, ensuring human material fulfillment. Another profound break came from Arthur Schopenhauer, 1788-1860. He viewed the Hegelian optimism as delusional, offering a pessimistic, calm reinterpretation of Kant's noumenal world. Schopenhauer concluded that the ultimate reality is a blind, ceaseless, irrational force he called the will, an eternal striving that causes all suffering and tension. He found solace only in the temporary escape offered by aesthetic contemplation art and Eastern philosophical principles of nirvana, the cessation of striving. The warm breath of these counter-movements, existentialism, materialism, and pessimism, fractured the singular narrative of idealism, leading philosophy into the fragmented, specialized, and intensely focused world of the 20th century. The distant night of universal systems was over. Chapter 17. Early Journeys. The American Pragmatists. The profound turning point of the 19th century, marked by the materialist and individualist revolts against Hegel's grand system, paved the way for a distinct new school of philosophical early journeys in North America pragmatism. This movement rejected the ancient and European quest for absolute fixed truth, and instead focused on the practical consequences and utility of ideas. Pragmatism was uniquely suited to the dynamic, forward-looking American environment. It was not concerned with being Parmenides or the absolute Hegel, but with what works in action. The core tenet was that the meaning of a concept or belief is found in the practical effects it produces. This was a philosophical approach based on the gentle footsteps of daily human experience and problem-solving. The philosophical formation of pragmatism was led by three key figures. Charles Sanders Peirce, 1839-1914. Considered the founder, Peirce emphasized the logical rigor of how beliefs are fixed. He argued that the function of thought is to produce habits of action. Doubt, which creates tension and unsettles habit, must be resolved through inquiry. and the final test of a belief's truth is its practical cash value in guiding effective action. This was a calm reinterpretation of truth, viewing it not as a static entity, but as something achieved through continuous communal scientific inquiry. William James, 1842-1910. James broadened pragmatism, applying its principles to ethics and religion. He articulated the concept that if a belief, such as the existence of God or free will, brings genuine positive and practical benefits to one's life, if it helps one live better, it can be considered true for that person. This was a softening filter on religious skepticism, emphasizing the psychological and existential utility of belief over metaphysical proof. His work was a powerful legacy for functional personal philosophy. John Dewey, 1859-1952. Dewey extended pragmatism into education, social ethics, and political theory, renaming his approach instrumentalism. He viewed ideas and institutions not as ends in themselves, but as tools, instruments for solving concrete human and social problems. For Dewey, philosophy was fundamentally about improving the human condition, making it a continuous evolution of democracy and communal life. The warm breath of pragmatism ensured that philosophy was integrated directly into the fabric of society, focused on public experience and democratic values. It represented a decisive break from the theoretical academic battles of Europe, grounding the quest for wisdom in the tangible results of human action. The legacy of this American journey was the creation of a philosophy that viewed change not with fear, but with proactive confidence, defining truth as a dynamic achievement rather than a passive discovery. The distant night of metaphysical doubt was met with the practical lantern glow of human effort and social improvement. Chapter 18. Turning Points. Nietzsche and the Death of God. The philosophical landscape, having survived the abstract systems of Hegel and the methodological challenges of Hume, faced its most profound existential turning point with the work of Friedrich Nietzsche, 1844-1900. Nietzsche's philosophy was a violent yet necessary break from the entire legacy of Western metaphysical and moral tradition, asserting that the old foundations of truth had quietly dissolved. Nietzsche's core message was articulated through a powerful, devastating, gentle metaphor. God is dead. This was not a theological statement, but a cultural observation. He meant that the pervasive Christian framework, which had served as the ultimate softening filter and source of moral and metaphysical certainty for over 2 millennia since the patristic synthesis, had lost its persuasive power and credibility in the modern scientific age. This loss created immense philosophical and spiritual tension, a vast silent void of meaning. Nietzsche recognized that the decline of this ultimate external moral anchor led to profound nihilism and the belief that existence is without objective meaning, purpose, or intrinsic value. His philosophy was an attempt to manage this post-theistic reality. He did not advocate for despair. Instead, he demanded a calm reinterpretation of human purpose and value. His solution was the creation of the Übermensch, Overman, or Superman. The Übermensch is not a physical superior, but a spiritual and ethical one, an individual who has accepted the loss of external authority and with serene courage creates his or her own values and meaning. Nietzsche also introduced the profound concept of eternal recurrence. The gentle thought that one should live one's life in such a way that one would joyfully and passionately will to live that same life in every detail infinitely many times. This thought acts as a moral crucible, shifting the ethical burden from external command to intense personal affirmation of life. Another critical challenge came from Sigmund Freud, 1856 to 1939, whose work in psychoanalysis was a philosophical evolution that undermined the rational conscious ego that had been the anchor since Descartes. Freud's insights, which we view as a misty recollection of internal forces, suggested that human reason and morality are often driven by deep, irrational, unconscious desires, the id. and internalized social constraints, the superego. This quiet psychological revolution questioned the very assumption of the fully rational, autonomous self. The legacy of this turning point was the decisive shift of philosophy into the existential and postmodern realms. The focus was no longer on seeking the grand universal truth of the absolute, but on the fragmented subjective and psychologically complex reality of individual existence. The distant night of ultimate certainty had fallen, and philosophy was left to wander, guided only by the lantern glow of individual will and psychological self-awareness. Chapter 19. Early Journeys, Phenomenology and the Return to Experience. The existential and psychological turning point of the late 19th century, which fractured the certainty of the rational self-pushed philosophy into its next profound phase of early journeys, the exploration of phenomenology and the rigorous return to direct experience. This movement was founded by Edmund Husserl, 1859-1938. Husserl recognized that both empiricism and rationalism had failed to adequately explain how the mind structures meaning. His goal was to create a new foundational method for philosophy, seeking the ultimate origin of truth, not in external material facts or abstract ideals, but in the structure of consciousness itself. Husserl's method was a systematic, unhurried process he called the phenomenological reduction, or epoché. Imagine this as a calm reinterpretation of Descartes' method of doubt. Instead of doubting the contents of the world, Husserl proposed gently bracketing or suspending judgment about the objective existence of the external world. This deliberate act of intellectual retreat allowed the philosopher to focus purely on the world as it appears to consciousness, the phenomena. The core principle that emerged was intentionality, the assertion that consciousness is always consciousness of something. Thought is always directed towards an object. This quiet structural insight became the new bedrock for philosophy, affirming the intimate, inseparable relationship between the mind and the world it perceives. Husserl's legacy was the creation of a systematic, rigorous framework for studying subjective experience. His warm breath of influence spread across continental Europe, establishing a methodology that could analyze the complexity of human experience, such as memory, perception, and emotion, without reducing them to mere scientific or psychological facts. His most famous student, Martin Heidegger, 1889-1976, took this early journey into a profound exploration of being sign. Heidegger's immense philosophical project was dedicated to recovering the original question posed by the Pre-Socratics. What is the meaning of being? Heidegger argued that the legacy of Western metaphysics from Plato onward had forgotten this foundational question, reducing being to a mere object or a commodity. He focused on the experience of Dasein, being there, the unique human way of existing in the world. He explored the human relationship with concepts like time, anxiety, and death, which we view as gentle metaphors for the finitude of existence, not as psychological states, but as fundamental structures of existence. Heidegger's work was a profound, softening filter on the technological mindset of the modern era, questioning the assumption that the world is merely a collection of resources to be exploited. He called for a more contemplative, engaged relationship with reality. The gentle footsteps of phenomenology provided a crucial systematic link between the rigorous methodology of classical philosophy and the existential concerns raised by Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, ensuring that the quest for fundamental truth continued in the face of scientific materialism. Chapter 20. Legacy. The long echoes of the 20th century. The philosophical currents of phenomenology and existentialism flowed deeply into the 20th century, creating a final, fragmented, yet immensely rich phase of legacy. This era was characterized by the philosophical engagement with language science and the pervasive political and ethical challenges of the modern world. One major early journey was the rise of analytic philosophy, primarily in the English-speaking world. This movement, influenced by logical innovations in the late 19th century, asserted that the fundamental task of philosophy was the logical analysis of language. Thinkers like Bertrand Russell and Ludwig Wittgenstein argued that many traditional philosophical problems were not genuine questions about reality, but simply linguistic confusions. Imagine this process as a methodical quiet act of cleaning language, clarifying concepts through formal logic and precise definition. Early analytic philosophy sought to build a perfectly logical language that mirrored reality, eliminating ambiguity and metaphysical speculation. This was a calm reinterpretation of the Socratic method, applying rigorous logical tools to language itself. Later in the century, Ludwig Wittgenstein, who had two distinct phases of thought, later gently retreated from this rigid ideal. In his second phase, he argued that the meaning of language lies not in its formal structure, but in its use within specific language games and forms of life. This was a profound softening filter, bringing philosophy back to the everyday practical context of human communication. Simultaneously, the existentialist legacy of Kierkegaard and Nietzsche flourished in Europe, engaging directly with the human condition. Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus asserted the principle that existence precedes essence. This means that human beings are born into the world as nothing, and only through their choices, actions, and immense freedom do they define their own meaning and purpose. This philosophy emphasizes radical responsibility and the anxiety that accompanies total freedom, which we view as a gentle metaphor for the weight of individual choice. The political and ethical challenges of the 20th century, which we acknowledge as distant echoes of large-scale suffering, compelled philosophy to address real-world issues. Thinkers in political philosophy and ethics engaged with the questions of justice, human rights, and social structure, seeking to build rational and equitable systems. John Rawls, for example, articulated a theory of justice as fairness using a thought experiment called the original position, imagining a society designed from a state of total ignorance to derive principles of a just liberal society. The legacy of 20th century philosophy is one of profound specialization and continuous self-critique. The vast, universal systems of the past are replaced by a collection of focused, rigorous disciplines. Philosophy has become a continuous, unhurried dialogue, constantly questioning its own methodology and assumptions, ensuring that the warm breath of critical inquiry remains central to human intellectual life. The long journey of philosophy from the water of Thales to the language of Wittgenstein has led us to this point of complex, quiet self-awareness. The search for wisdom, though fragmented, continues to illuminate the distant night of our world. In this quiet journey tonight, we drifted through the gentle echoes of the history of philosophy. We moved from the quiet wonder of the Ionian origins and the structural formation under Plato and Aristotle, through the turning points of the scientific revolution and the revolt against the absolute, to the profound, fragmented legacy of the modern age. We followed the gentle footsteps of wisdom from its earliest beginnings, to the soft traces they leave behind in the foundations of our thoughts. The story of philosophy reminds us that the quest for wisdom is not a race to a final answer, but a continuous, patient process of questioning. It teaches us that every great truth inevitably creates a new challenge, and that the greatest strength of human reason lies in its capacity for perpetual, gentle self-correction. If this peaceful journey brought you ease, you may leave a soft like, or whisper in the comments where you'd like to drift next. And now, let the night grow still. Let your breath slow. May sleep come softly and carry you into peaceful rest. Good night.